I have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this wonderful land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is where we talk about what I consider to be the most defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we face and the impact that it has on just about every aspect of our lives, from our individual relationships to our family relationships, to our community relations, to our politics, to our business affairs. Everything is impacted by the character issue. And so I write about it in my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, the international bestseller and definitive work by many accounts on the subject of manipulative behavior, and my other book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, the comprehensive manual for understanding the disturbed characters in your life, the psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, malignant and otherwise, individuals who kind of drive you crazy, what to look for in the way of getting help. Also my book, The Judas Syndrome, specifically targeted to the Christian faith community. And my book, How Did We End Up Here, co-authored with Dr. Kathy Armistead, Relationship Partner Survival Guide, navigating through this character-disordered world of ours. And I write weekly on my blog at manipulative-people.com or drgeorgesimon.com. Either URL will take you to the same place. And then I visit with you weekly on this program. And we are, fortunately, once again, live tonight. Today is October the 22nd, 2017, and we are live tonight. So if you want to join the conversation, if you have a question you want to ask, if you have a story you want to share, you can give us a call at 501-258-8326. That's 501-258-8326, and I'll be happy to take your call. Well, it's been another interesting week. Another week where these mad individuals who have power in our world have brought us to the brink once again, and we feel all the tensions. And so I wanted to speak tonight just a little bit. Once again, I've covered this topic before, but I want to do it again. I want to talk about power and character. Because we've had a lot of material written and a lot of things said about the nature of power and its effect on character. And I want to speak to that a little bit because over my years working as a mental health professional and dealing with every variety of character disturbance you can think of, I've come to some conclusions of my own regarding power and its relationship with character. There was a person who is famously quoted. There was an individual, Lord Darfur Acton. He is famous for the quote that many folks are familiar with. The quote is, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This was an assertion that corruption, especially political corruption, corruption even in business affairs, corruption in daily conduct, is influenced by the acquisition of power, and that power inherently tends to corrupt, just by its very nature, and that when you get too much power, it's even more corrupting, because it's power itself that by its very nature tends to corrupt the human spirit. Well, long ago I realized how flawed that issue, or how flawed that proposition is. There's another famous person who had some similar thoughts about power and character. Not some similar thoughts, actually, some very different thoughts. And that was Abraham Lincoln, one of our more admirable political leaders. And he laid forth this proposition. He said that if you want to test a person's character, give them power and then observe how they use it, how they handle it. Once they have a taste of power, you will learn everything you really need to know about the solidity and the integrity of anybody's character. Now, I've long contemplated the two propositions put forth by Lord Darfur Acton and by our esteemed former president, Lincoln, and I think Lincoln has got it right. And an analogy I use at workshops, and by the way, I'll have some more to say about that later, because I'll be doing some more workshops next year, a smaller number, but more intensive training in select cities. So I'll be giving you some more information about that later. But I use the analogy of parents or a parent and an infant child and the power relationship that exists there. You know, when that newly born child enters the world and is placed in the care of a parent or other caretaker, the power that that caretaker has over that fledgling, young, helpless life is absolute. It's literally the power of life and death. That infant can do nothing to sustain its own life. It is entirely dependent. It cannot do anything to survive. on its own. So the power the caretaker has is absolute. So if absolute power inherently corrupted absolutely, then no caretaker could do a responsible job of caring for that infant. You see, most of us who have had children, we realize the power we have over a newborn. We realize how immense that power is. But it doesn't go to our head, and it doesn't corrupt us in our functioning. Instead, most of us, not all of us, it's unfortunate that there are people of miserable character out there for whom that power is not regarded in the same way, but most people regard the power that they have over that helpless life. Most people regard that power with some degree of awe, trepidation, humility. It's humbling to think of the power that we hold and the responsibility that comes along with it. And that sense of responsibility only derives from a sense of empathy and care and concern for the preciousness and vulnerability of human life. So that power that we hold, we regard with trepidation. And we want to exercise it judiciously, cautiously, with a sense of deep responsibility and sacrifice. Power in and of itself cannot corrupt. It all has to do with character. And we live in such an age of such rampant narcissism, such rampant character disturbance fostering climate that we have all too many folks who meet power with a tremendous sense of irresponsibility, with no humility, who simply want to wield it for their own advantage. And the way it is with most corrupt characters who are impaired in their integrity, in their conscience, in their capacity to care, these folks have a tendency, their relationship with power is this: they crave power voraciously. They have a huge appetite for power. Second, they crave that power for its own sake. Many times they don't really even need it. Sometimes the power seekers among us are rich beyond measure, materially, monetarily. And yet they might seek political power just for the additional power that it brings. They already have plenty. There's no advantage. So corrupt characters have this thirst for power. And they seek it for its own sake, because additional power is ego-enhancing for them. It makes them feel special, important, powerful. And lastly, corrupt characters, in addition to craving power unreservedly and craving it for its own sake, they inevitably abuse it whenever they have it for self-serving purposes and for other untoward purposes. Maybe they wield it recklessly, without care, without sufficient care for who might be affected. That's just the way it is. And that's why we're in the political mess that we're in. It's an unholy relationship, and it all starts with character. Now, maybe some folks disagree. That's okay. I wanted to revisit that issue, which I visited before, because we're going to be talking about some of the events of the week on the program today, especially events of the week that concern our current president and some of the other political figures in the news. So if you have a disagreement with me, or you want to ask a question, or you want to challenge any of the things that we're talking about, or maybe you just have an example you want to share, you're free to give us a call tonight, because we are live on October 22nd, 2017. We are live, and you can call in at 501-258-8326. That's 501-258-8326. Well, I did want to share with you that I've been out of pocket here a couple of weeks, and I actually fully planned on airing the show live from a remote location last week, but that didn't work out, and the reason it didn't work out had to do with where we were. We were in north central California in the wine country, north of San Francisco, in the Napa Valleys, Sonoma Valleys, the Russian River Valley, a few other things, a few other areas there. And as many of you know, fires have been raging in that area. Wildfires have been raging for some time. They're just now really beginning to be controlled, because there was fortunately some rain a few days ago that really helped, and extensive crews have been battling these fires round the clock for a couple of weeks. And what happened is so interesting this year. Nature, of course, is a powerful driver of these kinds of things, and wildfires are nothing new to these folks in California. But what happened this year is that after years and years of drought, they had a really pretty good spring, a pretty wet spring. A lot more rain than usual, a lot more rain than typical, and that really helped with the drought. But what it also did is it fed the grasses on the hillsides. So this year there was just plenty of grass on the hillsides, and that grass got very, very dry as the summer commenced, and proceeded with virtually no rain. And so when the fall came, all that parched ground with all that dry grass was just wonderful kindling, just waiting for any spark to ignite it. And some strong winds came through the area a couple of weeks ago and knocked down some power lines. And when those power lines got knocked down, the electrical arcing from the fires ignited some wildfires that spread very, very quickly and extensively, and destroyed many homes and forced the evacuation of many people, and unfortunately claimed many lives. And we had actually planned a trip for pleasure with our wine club to this area, and we'd thought about canceling it because the fires broke out a few days before we were scheduled to take off. But we decided, after talking with the families who run the small wineries that we were going to be visiting, that it would be in the economic and best interest of the folks there to actually stay on plan, do our best to be safe, and do our best to give our patronage to these folks that desperately needed it. These are not big, large commercial operations that we go to where they're just raking in money hand over fist, but these are basically farmers with a passion and who have kept things in families for a couple of generations and who work hard at a craft. And so we went and we lent our support, and we encountered many folks who had unfortunately experienced some devastation, and we helped what we could. But the biggest thing we did is we helped by just being there. Our patronage was much appreciated. Many places had to close, open only on special invitation. And many folks who had initially scheduled to come out canceled their trips, leaving these businesses pretty well hurting. So we decided to go, but how this relates to us not being live, I see we have a caller coming in. I'm going to take this call. Hello and welcome to Character Matters.
Oh, hello. Is this Dr. Simon?
It is.
Well, hello. I have a question for you about a character disturbed person that is covertly being covertly physically abusive, and
okay. Can you hold on for 1 second?
Sure.
I'm going to keep you on the line here. I just want to finish mentioning this trip. Because I was explaining why we were not live last week, and that is because in the area where I was in Northern California, even though I planned to be live, there were virtually no cell towers in operation because of the fire and virtually no internet service. That's why, even though I had wanted to have a live broadcast last week, you were treated the very last minute to a pre-recorded program, and I couldn't take calls. So I was just explaining that to the audience. But go ahead with your situation.
Yes. Well, my question is, I am being covertly, in my opinion, physically abused by a male in-law who, every time I see this person, they pretend to be giving me a hug, but they're really pounding me on the back. And short of avoiding this person, which I try to do, it's not always possible. And I don't know how to get him to stop it or how to respond to it.
Have you requested that this embrace be of a different character?
I've pushed away from him, stepped back from him, kind of blocked him so that he couldn't get in my space, hoping that he would get the idea that I don't want physical contact with him. But he keeps it up.
And this is a relative?
Yes, it is. It's my husband's younger brother.
Mm-hmm. And, but it sounds like you've been hesitant to confront him directly.
Yes.
And where comes that hesitation?
Well, the relationship with him and his wife has been strained for an extremely long time, as long as we have been married. And this man also has he treats my husband disrespectfully and with contempt and disdain as long as I've been around to witness it. So it's never been a good relationship. And I feel like since it's strained, if I say to him, I don't want physical contact with you, or your hugs don't feel good, it will be perceived, or he will use it to make it look like I'm initiating conflict, which I can't afford to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the dilemma. You see, he is in your external environment. In other words, you have no power over either his thoughts or his actions. That's under his control.
Correct.
You have the power and you have the responsibility to take care of yourself. And when you predicate your behavior based on what you anticipate will be somebody else's response, you're automatically in a one-down position. In other words, when you're trying to second guess, if I do this, what will this other person do? You've automatically put yourself in a one-down position. Your decision should be based on what is right and healthy for you at the time, not on what the likely response somebody else is going to. You don't have control there.
Correct.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you need to do is confront. If you're not willing to confront the behavior directly, then you need to set some limits on contact with this person.
Yeah, I have done that. That I have done. But there are times when it's unavoidable and I have to be around him. And this is a 58-year-old man.
Yeah, so it would sound like in those situations where the hugs are not easily avoidable and you might be able to see it coming, so to speak, no hugs, please. I tend to find your hugs just a bit too much. So can we just say hello?
Yeah, okay, that's really good advice. It sounds like I'm going to have to be just direct with him.
Yeah.
And I tried doing that several months ago. Speaking to him, I told him that I didn't want a hug, and it made him visibly angry, which concerned me also. And mind you, this has been going on, I'm embarrassed to say, for about 10 years.
Oh my goodness. And when you say you made him visibly angry.
Yes. Facial expression. Yeah. You could see it in his eyes. I mean, he was very angry. Yeah.
And when you said you were concerned because of that, what was your gut telling you could possibly happen?
Well, my husband and his brother, they're business partners. And so that's kind of a sticky situation, too, since they're business partners. And the whole family dynamic with this guy, for as long as I've been around to observe it, everybody walks on eggshells around this couple. And because I don't know why. I don't know why they walk around on eggshells. I think they were conditioned to do so by their parents because they wanted the appearance of peace in the family, and like all of his siblings, nobody will stand up to him. In fact, I'm the first person that's actually started tried to politely push back. And I don't think, I think it's made other people feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And I'm absolutely convinced this guy, this is not a nice thing that he's doing because, in fact, I've even been accidentally bumped into before, to translate that as a body slam.
Right.
Things like that, just,
So it's not appropriate for me from such a distance to make any kind of formal assessment or diagnosis, but for what you describe, the behavior you describe is much like I talk about in my book, In Sheep's Clothing.
I have your books.
What you describe is a fairly aggressive personality with a lot of narcissistic characteristics and a sense of entitlement. These are typically dominant seekers who feel entitled to have their way and who kind of want to rule the roost. And they use anger and intimidation and the threat of some kind of an aggressive action to basically intimidate people. And most people, to keep the peace, so to speak, will defer to them.
Yes.
And get into a pattern of being subordinate, basically. And that only reinforces their...
it gets worse. It's gotten worse.
Yeah. So that seems like the kind of situation you're describing anyway.
You've hit the nail on the head. I guess what I need to do is work on just how to respond to him. I guess I'm changing the rules of the game, and he doesn't like the boundaries that I'm setting. And
of course, for individuals of the type that I described, they want to set the rules, and they don't want to exceed to any rules. So, yeah, if you start setting the terms for proper engagement with you, you can expect that he is not going to like it.
Yeah. Well, then maybe the next time that I see him, perhaps if he comes to approach me again, or maybe instead of waiting for him to approach me, maybe I approach him and tell him, so there will be no misunderstanding between the two of us. I don't wish to have any physical contact with you.
Yeah.
I've thought about doing that.
Sure. And, you just own it. It makes me feel uncomfortable. You don't have to put it on them. It makes me feel uncomfortable. I think we're better just shaking hands, or not even that. Maybe we're just better exchange.
Probably squeeze my hand off if I did that.
We're better off exchanging pleasantries. Can we just exchange pleasantries? And just set that limit. Now, here's the good news along with the bad news.
Okay.
When these individuals who are used to having their way, setting their own rules, and are always looking basically for a position of dominance, when somebody basically says to them, no, you can't have it all your way, here are some rules for engaging with me, they don't take this easily. And if they have been primarily covert, as you aptly describe it, if they've been primarily covert, they're likely to get a little bit more overt. And I think you probably have sensed that, which is maybe why you have been hesitant to kind of put your foot down and draw some lines in the sand. But so that's always a possibility. Now, the good news about that is they out themselves for who they really are. The bad news about that is people can get hurt, so you need to do what you need to do to protect yourself. In other words, I would be sure that you don't do any heavy confronting when you're in a situation where you don't have some support resources immediately nearby.
Yeah, I would never be like I've set my own rules. Like I would never be alone with this person in for instance, an office type setting or room or anything like that. And because I'm sure there will be another situation soon, when I see him or have to be around him, I will tell him this with other people, maybe not so that other people can hear it, not loud or anything perhaps, but there will be other people present. So,
yeah. You don't need to make a spectacle, but you also don't need to be overly cautious. In other words, you have to not be so conscientious that you worry so much about what he's going to think or how he might respond. You can't let that be the main concern. What you need to make the main concern is your own welfare and your own safety. So, make sure that the support is there and available. And if they should... if they should overhear this person basically exposing themselves as the kind of character that you suspect they are, that's not to your disadvantage, frankly.
I agree. I guess it's just it bothers me that the history here has started out as verbal, it was all verbal. Yeah. But then when it was taken to, I couldn't even imagine coming up with something like this and, pretending like you're using the friendly gesture of a hug to physically harm somebody, which is, I know he's doing this to me.
To brandish power. We've been talking, well, I don't know if you heard the earlier part of the program, but I began talking about the relationship of power and character. And because there is such a really tight relationship between power and character, and it's not what we typically think, as I mentioned on the program before, people with character deficiencies tend to have this inordinate craving for power, and they abuse it whenever they have it. So my guess is I don't know your situation firsthand, but I would feel safe in venturing a guess that in this partnership that he has with your husband in this business, that these power dynamics are at play there too. And
yes, sir. Absolutely.
I would venture a guess that in their history there's been a struggle for who's going to be top dog and in control.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And my husband is the president of the company.
Yeah. And so this is how it goes with such personality types, and you need to just simply set your limits. You don't have to tolerate any behavior that makes you uncomfortable. It's just as simple as that.
Right. So I think perhaps then next time I see him, I will not accuse him of anything like that, because I think that might escalate tension, or hostility, which I don't want. I don't want a confrontation. I just want civility.
Yeah.
But tell him that, find a nice way to tell him I don't want physical contact. And then if after that he still persists, I don't know what I'll do then.
Yeah, well, we can dispense with the hugs. So just let's just dispense with the hugs, okay? That's it. It doesn't have to be intimidating. It doesn't have to be finger pointing. It's you taking the responsibility. That's not what you want. And for you, a simple hello will be sufficient.
I will use that wording. That's perfect.
Yeah. So.
Well, I thank you so much for taking the time to take my call and to help me.
You're so welcome. And I'm sure you mentioned that you mentioned books. So I'm assuming that you've gotten more than just In Sheep's Clothing.
Yes, and I have In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance, and they have helped me tremendously.
Well, I surely hope so. And
I plan to get the Judas Syndrome. I think it's the Judas Syndrome. I want to read that one.
Yeah, so, I think you would all. I mean, here I am plugging my own books, of course, but for your situation, also sounds like it. In my book, The Judas Syndrome, is written from the Christian faith perspective, but it sounds like How Did We End Up Here would also be of help, because there's a lot in How Did We End Up Here that I didn't include in the first two books about how to judge when these kinds of characters, what to look for if they're making any positive strides and really taking to heart any of the messages they're getting from other people about what they need to do to modify their character. And because you have a long-term relationship here, that's why I think that things in How Did We End Up Here would be really beneficial to you.
Oh, well, I will get both of those books. I'm sure that they will be a great help to me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the call.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Simon. I appreciate you taking the time out to speak with me.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
What a nice call, and kind of illustrative in a way, because we were talking about these power dynamics. And, they always play out in relationships. And there are certain personalities that I talk about in my books that I call the aggressive personalities. They come in various types, various subtypes. And the caller mentioned the more covert type, the kind that's sneaky, not passive, but sneaky, covert, subtle. They do things where it's hard to call them out. It's hard to objectively pinpoint their behavior. It's hard to objectively expose their MO, because they're clever. they'll sneak in a slight, or they'll sneak in a little physical roughness, as this caller demonstrated. And then if you should try to accuse them, they'll look at you like you're the crazy one, or they'll make a scene and say, "What? You got a problem with me hugging you?" or something like that. Make you look like the crazy person. This is just the kind of ways that covertly aggressive people operate. And I talk about that in my book, In Sheep's Clothing. They are like the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing. And I also talk about them in my book, Character Disturbance. But what I was getting to just a bit earlier is that this is just another example of how character and the power dynamic work. Power itself is not the corrupter. Character is the most important aspect. It is the most important aspect of our makeup. Who we are in character has to matter. That's why I call this program Character Matters. People of sound character. This is the simple definition for a person of integrity. People of sound character are aware of and take responsibility for all their primal urges and instincts. In other words, they don't deny them. They're very aware of them. And in compassionate care and concern, in empathy and positive human regard, they temper those instincts. They do so consciously and deliberately. They engage in effective self-management for the greater good. That's what makes a person of character. We all have these innate drives in us. Drives to succeed, drives to prosper, drives even toward power. We have sexual drives. We have aggressive urges. The person of character is in touch with, is deeply aware of what's going on inside. And out of care and concern and positive regard for this wondrous miracle that we call life, out of that regard, they make it a point to master themselves, to be master of themselves, to conduct themselves with civility and with positive regard of others. That's what defines character. What we have, unfortunately, in our day and time, because of many cultural factors that promote narcissism, many narcissistic features in our culture, what we have is an explosion of character disturbance, and it's affecting everything. It's especially affecting our intimate relationships. It's why our marriages don't hold together. It's why our families fall apart. It's why there's so much dysfunction. It's even why people who are predisposed, now I'm going to get into trouble with some folks, but I will tell you, there are certain predispositions that people have towards certain mental illnesses. And those predispositions that they have are not their fault. They're biochemical, and they're built into their makeup. But character is kind of like a psychological immune system. With solid enough character, you can manage those predispositions, even to the point that more serious illnesses don't develop. There are rare cases. The cases are truly rare, where someone's biochemistry is so inherently and innately out of whack that there's just absolutely nothing they can do. This happens. This does happen. People's chemistry does go awry through absolutely no fault of their own. None. But many other times, character plays an important role. And that's why I spend so much time writing, speaking, and otherwise talking on the subject. I believe it's the issue of our time, the defining issue of our time. And we've lost our way when it comes to all of those things necessary to foster proper character development in individuals. We've lost our way. Now, I do believe the pendulum is swinging back. I do believe that our culture of narcissism has produced so much character disturbance, and that we have suffered as a result of it so much that we're beginning to see that we can't go on like this. And so some changes are afoot. And of course, it's high time in my book, and that's why my greatest hope and prayer has always been that my work is helpful to folks in that very enterprise. It's why I do it. The caller a moment ago indicated that the books have been of help to her. That's why I do it. It's all about empowering people's lives so that they can survive and thrive in this character-disturbed world of ours. If you're in a family, you don't have to look very far. Just start taking some inventory. Chances are pretty good that several people in your own family have significant disturbances of character. That's how widespread the problem has become. And there's always something else or someone else to blame. And so long as we're blaming our circumstances, our biochemistry, somebody else's behavior, so long as we're pointing the finger elsewhere, things will not get better. Character is the issue. And it, as I mentioned before, provides a sort of psychological immune system to many more serious conditions that can develop. Let's just take, for example, let's say a tendency toward addiction runs in your family. Let's just say that is true. You know very well, growing up, that this tendency exists in your family. A huge tendency toward addiction. Then someone offers you that first cigarette or that first drink. And you say to yourself, I know this predisposition runs very strongly in my family, but I think I can do this. In other words, you have that sense of grandiosity, of omnipotence, and maybe even a sense of entitlement. And so you start down the road. And then some things happen. You witness some things happening. You witness, for example, that your behavior when you imbibe is problematic, that you tend to go overboard. Or that you can't be anywhere without lighting up to reduce anxiety. You see all these things. And if you're conscientious enough, the message should already be coming through to you you're at risk. You're at risk. To ignore that risk, and to proceed down the road of eventual addiction. I know many people will disagree with me, but that's a character issue. That's a character issue. And with enough integrity of character, you can avoid the consequences that could follow. Nobody puts a gun to the head and forces you to engage in these high-risk behaviors, generally speaking. Now, I know that's a little controversial, but I'm here to tell you that with enough character resources, one can resist some of the temptations of life, and one can make more rational decisions. But it all starts with character, and that has to be built in early. That character development has to be fostered early. Pretty much our personalities are formed, around ages 6 or 7. By that time, our basic character structure has been laid down. Now, it gets solidified in our preteen and early teen years. As we enter young adulthood, our personalities are pretty well formed and shaped. It's very, very hard to change our typical ways of operating after that time, as anyone who's ever had any character-related problems will tell you. I have so many people who come to me. They either ask for the consultations I do on Skype all over the world. I do these consultations on either FaceTime or Skype or Zoom or one of the other interfaces all over the world. I get folks who are in their late 40s, mid 50s, sometimes even early 60s, who have finally seen the light. They've come to appreciate that their lives are a shipwreck, and that their lives are a shipwreck precisely because they never developed the character to effectively self-manage themselves and resist the temptation to engage in high-risk behaviors. So they show up wanting the help. They want to know what they can do, and what they find is how tough the ordeal is, how difficult it is to make the changes that are necessary to grow in character after a certain age. It's really tough. Now, it can be done. It takes a lot of motivation. It takes a lot of will, just the right circumstances. And it takes the right kind of intervention, too. You know, there's a huge misconception out there that character-related problems cannot be treated, that is pretty much hopeless, that if somebody has a personality disorder or a character disorder, that's it. They're always going to be the way they are, and there's no help for making them change. Here's the real truth of that. None of the traditional methods that have been developed within the major mental health fields, psychiatry, psychology, social work, marriage and family counseling, none of the major paradigms developed are effective because they were never designed to be. But there are some paradigms that are helpful and are useful and can actually help people who have the right motivation, even folks with marginal motivation, because that motivation can be built up over time. With a properly equipped and properly motivated therapist, people can grow and change, even people with significant disturbances of personality and character. So it's a great misnomer out there, and it's a great cop-out for the profession, for all the mental health professions. because we've been doing it wrong for so many years. We've been understanding the problem wrong, and we've been doing it wrong when it comes to intervening. And then we just throw up our hands and we say, well, the problem is inherently hopeless. No, it's not. What's hopeless is trying to intervene with methods and strategies that were never appropriate for the intervention in the first place. That's what's hopeless. It's going to get you nowhere. As anyone who has gone to a typical counselor before, maybe coerced their toxic relationship partner into coming in a time or two for some insight-oriented psychotherapy, only to find that things only got worse. Maybe even the toxic relationship partner was a good, shall we say, impression manager or image control manager, skilled in the art of interpersonal manipulation, seduction, charm, whatever the case may be. Maybe they just pulled the wool over the eyes of the therapist completely. Maybe they even made the other person in the relationship seem the heavy or the bad guy. And things only got worse. And then the person who sought the help and dragged their partner into it, hoping to get the help, only feels worse and experiences what we call therapy-induced trauma. In other words, they went for help and they were traumatized by the experience, leaving them feeling completely hopeless. So it's a whole different ball game in our day and time. That's why I've written my books. You'll want to avail yourself of them in sheep's clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, the definitive work and the international bestseller on manipulative people. Character Disturbance, the phenomenon of our age, the more in-depth study of all the disturbed character types that you're likely to encounter, from narcissists to malignant narcissists to psychopaths and sociopaths, all of them, they're in there. My book for the Christian faith community, The Judas Syndrome, and my book with Dr. Kathy Armistead, that is really the handbook for the relationship partner in our day and age, how to survive and thrive in this character disordered world. My book with Dr. Kathy Armistead, How Did We End Up Here? How did we end up here in your relationship? And how did we end up here as a society? It's all explained for you in there. And then, of course, my blog site, my website, drgeorgesimon.com, manipulative-people.com, with hundreds of timely articles for you to peruse and to learn how to deal with your situation more effectively and empower yourself in the process. And then, of course, this program that airs on UCY.tv every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. We should be, once again, live next week. I'll be going to Memphis this weekend for a peace conference. But I should be back in time to be in front of the microphone for our program Sunday evening. And I hope you'll join us then. Once again, my apologies for not being able to give you advance notice about the program not being live last week, as we were in North Central California in the midst of the wildfires with no internet service virtually and no cell phone service, hardly at all. So many towers were down. So many power lines were still down and out. So my apologies for that. But we should be live again next week. And so I invite you to tune in with your questions and comments. You can call in as well. And as always, remember, what really makes this country great is when we have people of character within it. It's not our military might or our economic power. It's the character of our people. I'm Dr. George Simon. See you again next week on UCY.tv. Character Matters.